The morning light, filtered through the majestic canopy of the old oak, painted dancing patterns on Sarah's kitchen floor, a daily ballet she cherished more than any masterpiece. For 20 years, these trees, a towering oak, a graceful maple, and a quartet of fragrant pines, had been more than just part of her property. They were the guardians of her peace, the silent witnesses to her joys and sorrows, and the very lungs of her small, vibrant world in the heart of suburban America. Their rustling leaves whispered stories of generations, their deep roots anchored her sense of belonging, and their sheer presence offered a verdant sanctuary from the endless hum of modern life. Each sunrise, the first cup of coffee on her porch, was a ritual consecrated by their shade, their bird song, and the cool, clean air they exhaled. They were, in every sense, her beloved family. Then came the letter, crisp and officious, from the Lakeshore Estates Homeowners Association, an entity she had long considered a benign, if somewhat bureaucratic, nuisance. It was a formal complaint, couched in chillingly polite terms, about view obstruction. Her trees, it stated, were impinging on the panoramic vista enjoyed by her new neighbors, the Millers, from their recently constructed second-story patio, a view of the distant lake that Sarah herself had rarely noticed, to contend with the closer, living beauty in her own yard. Sarah initially dismissed it, a misunderstanding surely, a clerical error. She attended the next HOA meeting, armed with photographs of her lush, mature trees, speaking passionately about their ecological benefits, their role in privacy, and the sheer impossibility of sacrificing decades of growth for a view. She even offered to trim them, to prune them meticulously, but the HOA board, a collection of unsmiling faces led by the impeccably coiffed Mrs. Albright, merely nodded, their gazes as unyielding as polished stone. The bylaws are clear, Ms. Peterson, Mrs. Albright had stated, her voice devoid of empathy. Maintaining unobstructed views is a community standard. Your trees exceed the permitted height. The letters grew more insistent, the language sharper. Fines were threatened, then levied. Legal action loomed like a thunder cloud. Sarah felt a creeping dread, a violation of her deepest sense of home. She spent sleepless nights researching property rights, local ordinances, anything that could protect her leafy sentinels. She consulted lawyers, who, with weary sighs, explained the iron grip of HOA covenants. The Millers, emboldened by the HOA's backing, started making thinly veiled threats, their entitlement palpable. The peace of her backyard, once inviolable, was now a battleground. Sarah, usually a calm and collected woman, felt a rage simmer within her, a primal fury at the injustice, at the audacity of strangers dictating the very nature of her private space. She fought, she argued, she pleaded, but the bureaucratic machinery of the HOA ground on, relentless and unfeeling. The day arrived with an ominous, cloudless sky. Sarah stood on her porch, trembling, watching as a crew, hired by the HOA, pulled up in industrial trucks. The sight of their chainsaws, glinting in the morning sun, felt like a physical blow. She screamed, she pleaded with the crew, tears streaming down her face, but they had their orders, their permits, their indifferent expressions. The roar of the engines drowned out her cries, the first shuddering crack, the sickening rip of bark, the agonizing groan of wood tearing. Each sound was a stab to her heart. The magnificent oak, which had sheltered generations of birds and provided shade for countless summer afternoons, crashed to the earth with a deafening thud that shook the very foundations of her house. Then the maple, followed by the pines. Within hours, her vibrant, living sanctuary was reduced to a brutalized wasteland of stumps, sawdust, and scattered branches. The once dappled sunlight now fell harsh and unforgiving on a barren expanse. Sarah stood amidst the wreckage, the acrid smell of fresh-cut wood thick in the air, the silence that followed the chainsaws a deafening scream in her mind. Her chest ached with a grief so profound it felt physical. They had not just cut down her trees. They had amputated a part of her soul, ripped away the essence of her home. She knelt, tracing the rough edges of a newly made stump, her fingers trembling. Her view, the view she cherished, was gone. And then, slowly, meticulously, the grief began to twist, transforming into something colder, harder, a resolve forged. In the crucible of her devastation, her eyes, still wet with tears, hardened with an almost terrifying glint. They wanted a view. Oh, she would give them a view. A view so magnificent, so utterly overwhelming, so profoundly defiant, it would eclipse anything they had ever imagined. In the barren expanse of her backyard, amidst the sawdust and the raw, bleeding stumps, a seed of an idea took root, not of a simple tree, but of an entire, insurmountable forest. The chainsaw's roar had long faded, but its echo resonated in the hollow space where Sarah's beloved trees once stood. The raw stumps, like open wounds on the earth, were a constant, brutal reminder of what the HOA had taken. For days, Sarah moved in a haze of grief and disbelief, the once vibrant backyard now a stark, sun-baked canvas of desolation. But beneath the profound sorrow, a tiny, unyielding seed of something else began to germinate, not just anger, but a cold, calculated resolve. If they wanted a view, she would give them a view all right. A view so monumental, so utterly undeniable, it would swallow their petty grievances whole. It was a thought born of pain, nurtured by defiance, and it began with a single word: Redwoods. Her research became an obsession. Night after night, hunched over her laptop, Sarah delved into the world of Sequoia sempervirens, the coast redwood, legendary for its towering height and astonishing growth rate. She learned of their incredible resilience, their longevity, their ability to shoot skyward at an almost unbelievable pace, especially in optimal conditions. The irony wasn't lost on her. The very trees designed to reach the heavens would be her instrument of poetic justice. She devoured forestry journals, consulted online forums, and even made discreet calls to nurseries specializing in rare, fast-growing specimens, masking her true intent behind vague inquiries about large-scale reforestation projects. The scale of her plan was audacious, even to her. To replace a few mature trees with a handful of saplings was one thing. To cultivate an entire forest, a dense, living wall that would dwarf any existing structure in lakeshore estates, was another entirely. She needed hundreds, perhaps even thousands, of saplings. The cost was astronomical, but the fire in her gut, the burning need for restitution, extinguished any financial qualms. This wasn't about money. It was about reclaiming her space, her peace, her dignity. The procurement of the saplings became a clandestine operation. She couldn't simply order hundreds of redwoods to her suburban address without raising eyebrows. Instead, she contacted multiple nurseries across different states, placing small, inconspicuous orders that were shipped to various P.O. boxes and even a trusted friend's out-of-state farm. She rented a nondescript utility van, making long, solitary drives to pick up bundles of slender, young trees, carefully packing them in the back, shrouded under tarpaulins, unloading them under the cover of darkness. Her movements were swift and silent, each trip a small victory against the looming presence of the HOA. Her backyard, once meticulously manicured, now became a discreet staging ground. She meticulously prepped the soil, enriching it with specialized nutrients she'd researched, creating an environment where these giants would not just survive, but thrive with unprecedented vigor. The planting itself was an arduous, solitary endeavor. Weekends, evenings, even stolen hours before dawn were dedicated to digging, planting, and mulching. She worked with a quiet fury, her hands calloused, her muscles aching, but her spirit invigorated. Each sapling, barely more than a foot tall, was carefully placed in a grid she had mapped out, maximizing density and future impact. She installed a sophisticated, automated irrigation system, buried beneath the surface, ensuring a consistent, optimal water supply without visible hoses or sprinklers that might catch an observant neighbor's eye. This wasn't just about planting trees. It was about building a fortress, inch by inch, root by root. She knew the growth wouldn't be instantaneous, but the planning, the sheer scale of her commitment, filled the void the chainsaws had left. There was a secret joy in the clandestine nature of her work, a defiant whisper against the tyranny of conformity. Initially, her neighbors, accustomed to the barren patch, paid little heed to the tiny, almost invisible saplings. But, as weeks turned into a month, and the redwoods, true to their nature, began to show astonishing signs of upward mobility, subtle shifts in the neighborhood's casual observations started to occur. Mrs. Albright, the unyielding head of the HOA, known for her vigilant oversight of lakeshore estates, was the first to notice. During her usual morning power walk, she would cast a casual glance towards Sarah's yard. At first, it was just a fleeting frown, a barely perceptible pause in her stride as she registered that the yard wasn't as clean as it should be, a few more stakes than she remembered. Then, her glances became longer, more frequent. One afternoon, Sarah, while gently watering her burgeoning forest, noticed Mrs. Albright's sleek black sedan drive past unusually slowly, the tinted windows obscuring her face, but Sarah could feel the weight of her gaze, a prickle on her skin. Another subtle sign came from a neighbor, Mrs. Davison, who usually limited conversations to pleasantries about the weather. "My, Sarah," she remarked one evening, peering over her fence with an overly casual air, "you're quite the gardener, aren't you? What are those little trees? They seem to be growing rather fast, don't they?" Sarah merely smiled sweetly. "Just some new varietals, Mary, trying to bring some green back after the, well, incident." She made sure her tone was innocent, dismissive, but she saw the flicker of curiosity, perhaps even suspicion, in Mrs. Davison's eyes. The HOA's meticulous maintenance crew, always trimming hedges and policing lawns, seemed to linger a moment longer near her property line, their glances shifting from the perfectly manicured lawns of her neighbors to the nascent, yet undeniably vigorous, growth in Sarah's yard. These were not direct confrontations, not yet. They were quiet murmurs, lingering gazes, the first ripples of curiosity and concern. Sarah felt them, sensed them, and a thrill, cold and satisfying, ran through her veins. The seeds of her vengeance were not just growing. They were being noticed. The quiet defiance was giving way to an undeniable presence, an emerging green challenge that would soon be impossible to ignore. The spring rains that followed the desolate winter were not just drops of water to Sarah, they were liquid vengeance, each bead nourishing the hundreds of tiny redwood saplings she had meticulously planted. What started as barely visible sticks in the barren earth soon transformed. Weeks turned into months, and to the astonishment of anyone who dared to look closely, the redwoods didn't merely grow, they surged. Sarah's backyard, once a testament to loss, was rapidly becoming a verdant testament to defiance. The slender saplings, initially knee-high, were now waist-high, then shoulder-high, their vibrant green needles forming a dense, almost impossibly fast-growing screen. The sun, which had mercilessly beaten down on the naked earth after the chainsaw massacre, now found itself increasingly dappled, then outright blocked, by the burgeoning forest. Passers-by would stop, necks craning, murmuring amongst themselves about the miracle trees or that crazy redwood lady. The air, once heavy with the ghost of her old oak, now hummed with a new, vibrant energy, thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, a living, breathing rebuttal to the HOA's sterile demands. The first official notice from the HOA regarding the new growth arrived in late summer, crisp and utterly predictable. It was a courtesy warning about unapproved landscaping changes and potential future view obstructions, a laughable understatement given the rate at which her green giants were ascending. Sarah read it with a sardonic smile, filing it away. With dozens of similar, increasingly futile letters, she had anticipated this. Every step of her project had been a chess move, planned with a precision born of anger and grief. When the final warning came, citing specific bylaws about tree height and species restrictions, bylaws that had conveniently materialized after her original trees were cut. Sarah's countermeasure was ready. She mailed back a meticulously compiled dossier of forestry reports, ecological impact studies, and obscure property rights clauses she had unearthed, all meticulously highlighted, proving that redwoods, specifically, were not explicitly prohibited, and furthermore, that her property, due to a centuries-old land grant she'd painstakingly researched, fell under a unique historical designation that granted her certain botanical autonomies. It was a legal labyrinth designed to frustrate a bureaucratic swamp that mirrored the one the HOA had dragged her into. The cat-and-mouse game intensified. Mrs. Albright, her usual composure fraying at the edges, began making frequent, unscheduled drives past Sarah's house, her luxury sedan creeping along the street, her eyes darting nervously towards the burgeoning green wall. Sarah would often be out there, tending to her growing forest, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. She'd wave cheerily. The HOA's next tactic was more aggressive, a notice detailing an inspection of her property for drainage issues, a flimsy excuse to get on her land and assess the true scale of her defiance. Sarah, however, had foresight. Weeks prior, she had installed a state-of-the-art subsurface drainage system, complete with digital monitors that meticulously logged every drop of water. When the inspector arrived, she met him at the property line, handed him a printed report demonstrating impeccable drainage, and politely but firmly denied him access, citing privacy laws and the lack of a proper warrant. He left, bewildered, his clipboard empty. The community's reaction was a fascinating, often contradictory, spectrum. Some neighbors, particularly those who had secretly resented the HOA's heavy-handedness, began offering subtle gestures of support. Mrs. Henderson from across the street would drop off freshly baked cookies with a conspiratorial wink. Mr. Chen, a quiet retired landscaper, once left a bag of specialized redwood fertilizer by her gate, no note attached. They admired her tenacity, the sheer audacity of her project. Others, particularly those whose views were now utterly consumed by the rapidly ascending green giants, were furious. The Millers, their second-story patio now staring directly into a dense, dark green wall, were apoplectic. Their complaints to the HOA became daily tirades. Whispers spread through the community. She's gone too far. It's an eyesore. What if they fall? But an equal number of whispers celebrated her. Her rebellion, once a private act of grief, had become a public spectacle, a symbol. Children from the neighborhood would bike past, pointing and marveling at the tree fortress. Some even started leaving small, handmade signs near her fence, "Go Sarah," or "Green Power." The HOA, now facing internal pressure from both sides of the community, was desperate. Their weekly meetings, once brief and cordial, devolved into heated arguments over the Peterson problem. Mrs. Albright, losing sleep over the ever-growing green barrier, called an emergency meeting. A new set of highly restrictive aesthetic guidelines were hastily drafted, explicitly targeting fast-growing, non-native tree species exceeding 15 feet in height. It was clearly aimed directly at Sarah's redwoods, but Sarah was one step ahead. Through her continued research into the obscure historical land grant, she discovered a clause that explicitly exempted her specific property from any new aesthetic guidelines imposed by the HOA post-1985, a clause placed there by the original, nature-loving developer. The HOA was effectively caught in their own web of historical neglect. The letters from the HOA escalated from threats to outright legal demands, now backed by the HOA's stern-faced lawyers. They demanded the immediate cessation of growth, the trimming of the trees, even their removal, citing potential property value depreciation and community disharmony. Each letter was more aggressive than the last, but Sarah, now surrounded by her growing emerald guardians, met each new volley with a calm, almost serene confidence. She knew her ground. The green wall was rising, and with every inch, her resolve deepened, solidifying into an unshakable fortress of nature's vengeance. 3 years had passed since Sarah planted the first redwood sapling, and her backyard was no longer a backyard. It was a forest, a living, breathing monument to defiance. The redwoods, now towering over 60 feet, formed an impenetrable, emerald wall, their colossal trunks thick and reddish-brown, their branches reaching skyward, creating a dense, whispering canopy that blotted out the sun. The air beneath them was cool and damp, imbued with the ancient scent of pine and rich earth, a stark contrast to the manicured lawns and sterile uniformity of lakeshore estates. From the street, Sarah's property was an anomaly, a dark green fortress rising majestically, its upper reaches disappearing into the clouds on misty mornings. The view of the lake, once the HOA's sacred cow, was not merely obstructed. It was obliterated, replaced by an awe-inspiring, primeval landscape that dwarfed the surrounding homes. The miller's second-story patio, once a perch for panoramic vistas, now overlooked a majestic, unyielding wall of bark and needles, a constant, verdant reminder of their folly. The HOA, under the increasingly frantic leadership of Mrs. Albright, had exhausted every conventional weapon in their arsenal. Fines had been ignored, legal threats countered with Sarah's meticulously researched historical exemptions, and inspections thwarted by her unyielding adherence to privacy laws. Their once unquestioned authority was crumbling, ridiculed by the very community they sought to control. Desperation set in, leading to their most aggressive and final attack. A formal lawsuit was filed, not merely for view obstruction or aesthetic noncompliance, but for gross negligence leading to potential property damage and community devaluation. They argued that the sheer size and rapid growth of the redwoods posed an imminent threat. Their roots would crack foundations, their height made them a lightning hazard, and their dense shade would foster mold and decay on neighboring properties. The lawsuit sought not only the immediate removal of all redwoods, but also substantial financial damages. It was a scorched earth policy, a last-ditch attempt to reclaim their dominion, backed by an army of high-priced lawyers and a flurry of expert testimonies, all designed to portray Sarah as a reckless, vengeful menace. The day of the hearing arrived, a tense, humid morning. The small courtroom was packed, a microcosm of lakeshore estates. Mrs. Albright, flanked by her legal team, sat stiffly, her face a mask of grim determination. The Millers, their expressions a mixture of anger and anticipation, sat nearby. Sarah, dressed simply but impeccably, sat alone at her table, a thick binder of documents before her. The HOA's lawyers presented their case with theatrical flair, painting a vivid picture of impending doom, of collapsing foundations and plummeting property values, all caused by Sarah's unprecedented act of ecological warfare. They brought in arborists who spoke of root systems, structural engineers who warned of wind shear, and real estate agents who testified to the unmarketable nature of homes overshadowed by such a monstrosity. The pressure was immense, the weight of their accusations heavy in the air. As the HOA's final expert finished, a hush fell over the courtroom. Sarah rose, calm and collected, her gaze sweeping across the faces of her neighbors, some sympathetic, some hostile. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clear and steady, "the HOA's claims, while dramatic, are based on a fundamental misunderstanding, or perhaps a deliberate misrepresentation, of the very nature of the trees in question." She then revealed her masterstroke, a brilliant, multi-pronged countermeasure she had been preparing for years. First, she presented certified geological surveys and engineering reports she had commissioned herself, proving that the redwood's root systems, unlike many other large trees, were primarily wide-spreading and shallow, not deep and invasive, posing no threat to foundations. She had also installed root barriers along her property lines, a proactive measure that rendered the HOA's claims moot. Second, she unveiled a detailed fire safety plan and lightning rod system she had implemented, far exceeding local code requirements, transforming her fire hazard into a model of safety. Third, and most devastatingly, she produced signed affidavits from multiple neighbors, not the Millers, but those who lived adjacent to her property, testifying to the positive impact of the redwoods, increased privacy, reduced noise pollution from the nearby highway, and a significant drop in their summer cooling bills due to the immense shade. She even had a signed offer from a prominent environmental tourism company, expressing interest in creating eco-tour of her property, turning the devaluation argument on its head. But her true coup de grace came when she presented a final, meticulously researched document, a rare, original copy of the Lakeshore Estates Development Charter from the 1950s, unearthed from dusty county archives. This charter, predating all subsequent HOA bylaws, contained a little-known clause, an environmental easement granted to the original developer, a known conservationist, which explicitly designated certain large parcels of land within the development, including Sarah's, as protected natural areas where native, fast-growing trees were not only permitted but encouraged for watershed protection and ecological diversity. This clause, she explained, superseded all later HOA rules regarding view obstruction or tree height, effectively rendering their entire lawsuit null and void. The courtroom erupted in gasps. Mrs. Albright's face went ashen, her lawyers whispering. Frantically, the Millers looked as though they had been struck by lightning. Sarah had not just found a loophole, she had found the very foundation upon which the HOA's authority, in this specific context, was built, and then she had systematically dismantled it. The tide had not just turned. It had become a tsunami, washing away the HOA's desperate final attack. The judge's gavel struck with a decisive finality that reverberated through the stunned courtroom, echoing the definitive end of the HOA's long, arduous campaign against Sarah. The lawsuit, once a terrifying weapon, had not only been dismissed, but had publicly exposed the HOA's overreach and bureaucratic ineptitude. Mrs. Albright, her meticulously coiffed hair seeming to deflate, gathered her papers with trembling hands, her face a mask of bitter defeat. The Millers, their view now permanently a towering wall of green, stared straight ahead, their expressions frozen in disbelief and incandescent rage. As Sarah walked out of the courthouse, the setting sun, filtered through the thick city trees, seemed to cast a golden, victorious glow upon her. She felt a lightness she hadn't known in years, a profound sense of vindication that settled deep within her bones. The battle was over, and the forest had won. The aftermath was swift and transformative for Lakeshore Estates. The HOA, crippled by legal fees and a significant loss of credibility, saw a mass exodus of its board members, including a humiliated Mrs. Albright, who quietly sold her house and moved away within months. The new board, chastened by the public spectacle, adopted a far more lenient and community-focused approach, understanding that their power derived from consent, not coercion. For the Millers, their luxurious second-story patio, once a symbol of their upward mobility, became an ironic private observatory to Sarah's triumphant redwoods. They rarely used it, preferring to remain indoors, their resentment a palpable, but ultimately impotent force against the undeniable majesty growing next door. Sarah's backyard was now truly extraordinary. The redwoods, unburdened by legal threats, continued their breathtaking ascent, their uppermost branches now brushing against the clouds. The property had become a living cathedral, a dense, awe-inspiring ecosystem where sunlight dappled through needle-filled branches, creating shifting patterns on the forest floor. Birds nested in the high boughs, their songs echoing through the natural chambers of the trees. Deer occasionally ventured from the nearby nature reserve, finding a secluded haven within the quiet sanctuary. The air was perpetually cool, imbued with the crisp, earthy scent of redwood, a stark, refreshing contrast to the manicured, often chemically treated, lawns of her neighbors. Her house, once prominent, was now nestled within a verdant embrace, a cozy dwelling at the foot of her personal mountain range. The forest's impact rippled through the community in unexpected ways. Initially, it had been a source of contention, a symbol of defiance. But as time wore on, and the redwoods matured into truly magnificent specimens, public perception shifted. Children who had once pointed at the tree fortress now played hide and seek on Sarah's property with her permission, of course, their laughter echoing through the giant trunks. Neighbors, even those who had initially sided with the HOA, found themselves drawn to its unique beauty. Casual walkers would often pause, gazing in silent admiration at the towering giants. Local schools started bringing field trips, teaching students about native California redwoods and the resilience of nature. Sarah's property became an unofficial landmark, affectionately dubbed Peterson's Grove, a testament to one woman's stand against conformity. For Sarah herself, the forest became a source of profound, unending peace. Her mornings were once again a ritual, but now, instead of just filtered sunlight, she watched the sun's rays pierce the dense canopy, creating ethereal beams of light. She walked through her redwoods daily, her hand resting on their rough bark, feeling the vibrant life pulsing within them. The anger that had fueled her initial defiance had long since dissipated, replaced by a quiet sense of satisfaction and a deep connection to the natural world she had so painstakingly rebuilt. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about creation, about the stubborn, beautiful power of nature to reclaim what was lost, and about one individual's capacity to stand tall against overwhelming odds. The redwoods were not just trees, they were her legacy, a living testament to resilience, a beacon of hope for anyone who believed in the right to cultivate their own patch of peace. Sarah had created more than a view. She had cultivated a purpose, a profound peace that grew deeper with every passing year, rooted firmly in the heart of her own magnificent, wild backyard.